back in those days, we were still so new. All of us came into the sideways. So Seth, who does all of our, I know like if I was hiring somebody today, I'd be looking for some kind of unambiguous evidence that a person was. But the reason we did that was because Sam didn't know how to draw. He couldn't draw arms. And so he was trying to draw arms and just kept looking like a banana. And we were like, fuck it, it's banana arms now. And we'll just...
Hey, Adam, how you doing tonight?
Hey, good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. So what part of the world are you calling in from?
Calling in from smack in the middle of the United States in St. Louis, Missouri.
Ah, there you go. It's a good part of the country. So what's your current title and role right now?
It was me and my two brothers started the studio back in 2012. It's one of those wear lots of hats kinds of scenarios. Somebody needed to be in charge of making sure the business was running. My two brothers do the bulk of the actual core game development work. And so that kind of left me to do that bit.
Figure out the other stuff.
So technically I'm the CEO. I think most of my like day-to-day on the job is actually building tech. So I do all of our like internal tools and stuff. I do all of our web infrastructure and process management and all that kind of stuff. So very much kind of a background role within the studio and then front facing, for the
Yeah, that's cool.
Studio.
It mixes things up, keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
Not the same old thing.
It does. It's bad for my ADHD because I'm constantly switching between things, so it can be brutal sometimes. But for the most part, it's really interesting because it's just a new kind of challenge every day or within the day.
So tell me more about the mission behind Butterscotch Shenanigans, right? Like you started in 2012 and you're like, hey, let's start our own effing studio. Just do this, right?
Yeah. We had a weird entry into the industry. And so our mission kind of evolved along with us just figuring stuff out. My brothers basically started it because they were both into games. Loved the idea of making them for a living. Didn't really know how, but just kind of started trying to do it. And the idea was starting mobile because it wasn't easier to be successful, but the barrier to entry to just get a game on the platform was lower. So they started making some mobile games. And at that time, it was mostly just the mission statement was simply, can we? Is this a thing we can do? And by the time I was coming to join the team, which was a couple years later, we had, not to throw it down right at the beginning of the podcast, but my youngest brother was diagnosed with cancer. And so he's fine now, just to get that fully out there.
Yeah, I heard.
He's fine now.
The podcast.
So at the time I was in grad school, they were trying to get this studio afloat, trying to figure out how the industry worked. And I was just doing other stuff. Sam got sick. I was like, okay, let me just get done with my program as fast as I can. Just have some brother time and see if I can help them achieve what they're trying to do, and just spend time, finish with school really fast and join the team. And our mission statement sort of both internally and externally just kind of instantly became bring joy. Because we needed some distraction. It was just, so for us internally for the work, it's basically how do we create an environment for ourselves and for our team that is stable, that we can thrive in, where we can just love the work that we're doing and where we can create just cool stuff that brings joy, right? And then externally, it's how do we create vehicles for joy, to kind of offset that kind of stuff that people have to deal with. And that's been our guiding thing really ever since. It was it's a strong, life-changing sort of moment that creates a lot of examination.
Right. Well, and that's great that he's doing well and everything. Yeah. And I saw too, you have a PhD in cellular and molecular biology, right? So that's interesting.
Yeah, it was, that was my original path. I've always loved the sciences in general, but biology and genetics in particular. And so that was the path that I still just kind of, I don't know, my whole life has been a haphazard following what seemed interesting, and so after college, I was trying to figure out what to do with myself. And I knew I was good at biology. Kind of similar to my middle brother, Seth, who really was the one who wanted to make games, but couldn't figure out a path in. He started a law school program and then dropped out to make games, but it was because he couldn't find a path into games initially. And for me, it was I just didn't know what I was going to do, period. So I just kind of just did the stuff that seemed like I could do it. So I went to grad school to this PhD program in cell molecular biology, which I loved. It was a really cool experience. I went to this multidisciplinary lab where I was surrounded by physicists and mathematicians, electrical engineers, and because we're doing this kind of computational biology stuff. And it was very cool. And I'm extremely glad that I did it. I didn't have a plan still about what I was going to do with it, besides just, I don't know, I just kind of wanted to see what it meant. I wanted to know what it meant to be on the sort of cutting edge of knowledge.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? I'd spent my whole life, dozens of years, reading knowledge that people claim to have produced. And I was like, I just wanted to see how that gets generated.
Right.
So it was an extremely cool experience. I'm glad I did it. And it doesn't translate directly into video games, but I don't know. The longer I've gone on and talked to people from all kinds of industries, the more it just seems clear that every industry is kind of the same. The details are very different.
Right. But yeah,
big picture, like trying to publish research findings is really not that different than trying to publish a video game. If you're getting a successful result in science is also mostly a probabilistic process, right?
Yeah.
It's remarkably similar, actually. And so, I don't know, I missed it for a while afterwards. But everything that I found fulfilling about that possible career path.
Yeah, it's some kind of analogy in this one.
It worked out pretty well.
Right. And, speaking of successful, I see Crashlands is coming out in April. That's exciting.
Yeah, this has been a long time in the making.
Yeah, how many years? I read 5?
That's basically 4.5 of working on it. So our last title, Levelhead, we launched in 2020.
Yeah.
Just right after the pandemic started. So we were renting an office space, and then pandemic hit. We all went home, and then I think 6 weeks later or 8 weeks later, published that game, right? And so that was a 2-year project that we just the timing was weird.
Yeah.
But that was our last title. And then we spent a few months kind of doing odds and ends related to that because there's always post-launch stuff to do.
Right.
And then basically middle of 2020, started really working on Crashlands 2. So this is our longest project, definitely. It's the sequel to our 2016 title, which is the one that I joined the team to work on. And that was kind of our escape from what was going on in our lives and stuff. So, it was coming home in a lot of ways. But back in those days, we were still so new. We were still
right.
All of us came into the sideways. So Seth, who does all of our programming, wasn't a programmer. He was learning by doing. Sam, who does all of our art, wasn't an artist. He was learning by doing. I came in doing all the web development. I'd never touched web development, never done professional programming. So we're just figuring that stuff out.
Yeah, DIY, right? Do it yourself.
Exactly,
You're just all right, let's figure it out.
Doing it all. Because we had time but no money, so we had to figure it out.
Yeah.
And we had just way too much confidence that we could figure things out. So we just
ignorance is bliss.
Really,
yeah.
Honestly, it really was. If we had known just how hard it actually was to do any of the stuff that we did, I can't imagine what it did. So that game. So it was 2016. We didn't know what we were doing.
Right.
And we barely pulled off making the original Crashlands because, if you look at it today, you're like, yeah, it's a pretty solid indie.
I was playing it actually the other day. Yeah, and it has a Steam feel to it, just in terms of the screen layout and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of a mobile forward because that was where we were coming from, right?
Yeah.
And it was so hard to build that at the time, but it wasn't anywhere close to the game we were trying to make, right? So.
Yeah.
But it was what we could do at the time, and we pushed every one of our boundaries so far to make it. When we finished it, we were thinking about Crashlands 2 potentially at that time, all the way back in 2016, and we were just like, we don't know. We barely made this one. We learned a lot while doing it, but not in a way that we were confident we could go do the sequel. And so we just needed to do other stuff.
Right.
And that worked out really well. I'm glad we did.
Yeah, get some more games in your belt, right? All right, let's try a different genre. Let's try something different, And
try a bunch of weird stuff, try new technologies. We reshaped how we do the work over and over again,
Right.
But it was really educational and really good. And then we finally started Crashlands 2 with all this new experience under our belt. We still, at that time, we were like, we can't make that. We can't make this game we're imagining. But it was at least, we could kind of see what that might look like. And we knew what the path was to get there. Like we'd learned enough that we could figure that out. So the first 2 years probably of the project was just building tools, experimenting, iterating on stuff. Because the question was, how do we build a game of the scale and complexity that we want this to be, but afford to do it as a team?
If you don't mind me asking, were you Unity or doing something different?
No, we're using GameMaker.
Oh, GameMaker. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're an odd duck out here for.
I hear the name once in a while.
Indies, it's pretty rare.
Mm.
It just like with any engine, it's got
pros and cons. Right.
For us, the main thing is just that it's for 2D, and we make 2D games very intentionally.
Right.
Because we can get a lot of speed that way. Again, downsides there too, right? There's trade-offs everywhere you look. But it's things are nicely meshed. Early project development with GameMaker is very, very fast. It starts to struggle once a project gets big. It starts to get a little unwieldy. But that's right. We spent a long time, working on our systems and tools to manage that.
Right.
So it's gone well. We have a great relationship with the GameMaker team. At least we feel like we do, but we do send them a lot of bug reports too. So who knows?
You're helping them make a better game engine, right?
Exactly.
They've probably grown, but they should understand and appreciate that.
It's the same when we get a bug report from a player, right?
Right. Yeah. So how's it wrapping up? Is it coming in hot, as we used to say?
It's
at Midway. Oh shit! Is this thing gonna?
I think
are we gonna land this thing?
Best case scenario, they always come in hot,
Yeah.
But we definitely, with our last game, that was the big focus we had, was how do we just learned about DevOps and those kinds of principles. And so we were trying to figure out how do we really do this so that we can, our whole thing has been scalability without scale, right? So how do we make it so that the team can just do more and more and bigger things, but without actually getting bigger, right? That was the big focus of what Levelhead was all about, is how do we retool the team? How do we do all of that to make that work? And so when we launched Levelhead back in 2020, we supported, was it 8 languages at launch?
Okay.
8 languages at launch. We sim shipped on Xbox and Xbox Game Pass and Steam and iOS
and Android. Wow.
And Switch. Right. So, So we sim shipped on everything. Right.
Yeah. That's not easy, especially for a small team.
And it was it was an eerie weekend after we launched it, because we were all hands on deck, ready to go.
Right.
And then it was just completely fine. And that was such a contrast with when we launched Crashlands back in 2016, where shit was on fire.
Right. Servers down or something.
It was just brutal. And we learned we never wanted to do that.
Right. So you guys are just like, oh, this is going to go to shit.
Exactly. We're just ready. And we knew we'd spent so much conscious effort trying to avoid it going to.
Right.
But you don't know. Yeah. There were a few little hiccups here and there, but systems were all good. They were all in place. And so they were easy to fix quickly and all that kind of stuff. So it went remarkably well. Crashlands 2, we're just like, did we learn all of our lessons? Did we figure all that stuff out? We're expecting Crashlands 2 to be a much bigger success in terms of just scale of sales and stuff.
Right.
And that comes with it. It's a lot more likely to knock our servers down and all that kind of stuff. But it was a really good test for all of it, because it's it's kind of it's not an online game, but it's a game where you make and share platformer levels with people.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of online activity, a lot of UGC storage, and a lot of people like things, right? So there's a lot going on.
Right.
The system that I set up automatically scaled successfully and did all that kind of stuff. So we're like, okay, we feel pretty good about Crashlands 2. So we will be working down to the wire. We started our beta test, which is a closed beta with volunteers. It's today, Wednesday.
Oh, wow.
I don't know when it's going to go live, but.
It'll go live about 3 to 8, 7 days, something like that. Okay. So,
So February 18th is my live. So we're just like a day into our beta test. We'll probably take a couple of weeks.
Right.
Have 100 testers in there, and it's gone. There's only one really horrifying bug so far, which is one of those, because Crashlands is it's an RPG, right? So you're like going around the world, crafting stuff, meeting characters, completing quests, and all that.
Yeah.
But it's just a really rare case. It turns out that sometimes you'll complete a quest, like kill a creature.
Yeah.
But the way the game is set up, that creature doesn't come back. So there's no way to cause it to re-trigger.
Right.
So that the game is just permanently broken. No.
Oh.
The worst, it's the absolute horror of like the worst kinds of bugs. Are the two that keep us up at night. And so it's actually worse that it only happened so rarely because then we don't know why. So outside of that, everything is smoothly. We've been doing localization kind of the whole time. And so
because that can be tricky.
It's always trailing. It's always, and especially this game has 150,000 words in it. So it's been a lot. We're kind of adding Russian last minute. So that just started today actually. So the Loc team is pretty confident they can get it done before launch, but it's tight.
So how many total languages are you going to support?
We're supporting English plus 8 others for the launch.
Okay. Ambitious. eFigs used to be the big one, right? Like,
for us, it's actually been simplified Chinese is our biggest, our biggest pool. And that's just true from original Crashlands. Just like for some reason, original Crashlands kind of took off in mainland China. But it's actually because it only launched in English back because we didn't know how to do anything. So
right.
Definitely not launching.
Just ship.
Just had to get it out the door, and we eventually did translate it. And oh boy, when you don't prepare for that, the game properly. But there's a cracked version of the game just kind of circulating in China that fans had just had translated, even though like the title art and everything.
Wow.
And
that's impressive.
It was still showing up. Yeah, it was still showing up in our analytics because I just had like a simple thing that would just like count like when somebody booted it up, and we would just store like a random unique ID. Nothing personal or anything, but just just tell that there was a unique installation somewhere. Just the sheer number of people on the game was just wild. And that one eventually Tencent reached out to us and they were like, "Hey, can we do this like officially?" Through at that time it was the Wii game platform, which is like kind of like a Steam alternative. And then we kind of officially entered that market, did the real translation.
Right.
And ever since, Chinese has actually been our most popular target audience for original Crashlands. And it's looking that way for Crashlands 2 also.
Wow.
So
there's a big player base over there. So it's,
we just have to hope that Steam doesn't get taken down because if it does.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. So now you've been doing this for a while. Like, what do you wish you had known about the game industry back when you got involved?
Yeah, this is one of those, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
If we had known anything about what we're getting ourselves into, I don't know that we would have done it. So I think it might just be an ignorance is bliss kind of situation. So, maybe nothing. I'm not sure if there's something I could have told my former self that would have been useful, I think if there was something, it would be that nobody knows how to successfully sell a game. Just nobody. And in the early years, because we were figuring it out, so we did GDC every year.
I go to GDC, go to PAX, do this.
Go to every talk. And when we were working on Crashlands, we were taking it to like every show we could afford to take it to, which wasn't a lot because we were just burning savings but we were doing all the things and hearing all these stories, both about why a game was or wasn't successful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the scientist in me every time was always asking, how do you know that though? Right. And so, so I was skeptical enough the whole time that we didn't get like fully swayed by any particular argument, but we still felt like there must be a secret out here. It's the same thing. It's like why, I don't know, we spend a lot of our lives reading self-help books also, productivity hacks, that kind of stuff. Just be like, there's a secret, right?
Yeah.
That if we somebody must know, and there isn't one. It's not that nobody knows it, it's that there isn't one. Everything is way too complicated and uncertain for any person to actually understand. And this is a super secretive industry.
Yeah.
We don't have access to any of the information we would need to actually know anything. Steam, the data that Steam has, they can't pick winners either. Like, I think that's the one lesson is like, just do what you feel like makes sense. It's probably as much. It's still worth hearing those stories to have examples and have a better sense of like what people are doing and what the consequences were.
Right.
Not with the goal of finding the secret, just kind of with the goal of collecting.
Well, and there's charlatans out there too. They're like, I got the answers. You give me money and I'll tell you the secrets. And, and it's like that in any kind of entertainment, right? Like I was in a band once and, we got screwed by different people who would promise us this and that. And our second album was like, you just made the list, right? It was from, Stripes, like you're on our shit list because all these people promised stuff, but they didn't know either. They were just looking for money, so yeah. Trust your gut and go.
Yeah. Which is particularly true at this stage, I think, in the industry where everything is really chaotic right now. It's very hard to find money. Then the charlatans are just really coming out of the woodwork. So the biggest lesson I would try to impart, and I think maybe the next one is to I think we did an okay job of thinking of what we're doing as trying to run a business for the long term rather than our goal wasn't to make the game we were working on. Our goal was to become the kind of a team that could make and sell games, right?
Yeah.
And I think we had to orient ourselves properly to think about things in that way pretty early on. I think the piece of that we didn't get all the way to was at that time we still thought that we could find a way to kind of make it work on our own.
Yeah.
Where we're we can roll each success forwards, collect our player base, grow the name of our studio, get attention that just grows and grows and grows, and eventually we're just truly independent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we just didn't appreciate just how hard it is to roll success forward. It's just unbelievably difficult. And, players don't care about studios like your average player, right?
Right.
They'll barely recognize the name except they've seen it in a splash screen, but they don't understand the relationship between that and the game itself, right? Don't care. And most players don't even care about genres, they just this is the game they play, right?
Yeah.
And so we were kind of naive thinking we could become a Blizzard, just
right. BioWare. Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, hey, a new Butterscotch game just dropped and everybody goes and gets it,
right.
Which, isn't impossible, but that's one of those that's a 40-year project. That's something we can do.
Aspirational long-term. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, speaking of the industry and anything like that, what advice would you give someone looking to get their first job here in 2025 with everything going on?
Not well positioned to provide advice on that since I personally haven't had to look for work in this industry ever. I owed my way into it via my brothers, right? And we hire very rarely on my team. We only have 9 people while we're working on Crashlands. For Crashlands 2. At level so we had 5 or 6. So we're a tiny team.
It keeps your burn rate down, which is nice, right?
Yeah, we have to. It's the only way to.
Yeah.
We've still had a few points where we barely made it, even with this small of a team.
Right.
So I think I'm not well positioned to give advice.
No, that's fair.
It's kind of the same as anywhere, though, which is, I know if I was hiring somebody today, I'd be looking for some kind of unambiguous evidence that a person was fluent in their craft and that they were team oriented. And I say that that's what I'd be looking for, but I can't tell you what that looks like because I wouldn't know how to show it to anybody either. But I'd be looking for evidence of that somehow, So I'd be looking at portfolios. I'd be looking at if you've written blog posts, social visibility,
demos and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, just stuff that shows that you understand and care about whatever their specific craft is.
Mm-hmm.
And it honestly doesn't take that much, I don't think, to get out ahead of at least the bulk of the pack. But the pack is so big right now.
It's big and there's more competition. So you do have to do more work and
and I think so. That's probably that's really that last piece of it is really to say right now, if you're having trouble getting into the industry, there are things you can do to stack the dice, definitely, and you need to be careful interpreting rejections, right? Because there's there could be a real reason for a rejection. But right now, statistically speaking, rejections have nothing to do with you, right? They are purely because of the scale of what's going on in the industry right now. There's stuff to hopefully that you can learn from that. I think getting good at that process itself is its own whole craft of the process of putting yourself out there and talking to people.
Yeah.
Put yourself out there and talk to people, right? The people that we've actually hired, we are a very family studio. So a lot of our team is family members. But we have a few people who came from outside, and one of them we met at a game jam, I think. And we're just impressed. We were hiring people. He applied, and so you seem great, and he still works with us today. And another one joined us part time. We were trying to build our QA department, and it was really easy to work with. Had a great work ethic. And we're cool. You just want to now that we figured this out, let's just make this a full-time role. And then our artist, we hired an artist for the duration of Crashlands 2, just get some extra art power because it's just such a huge project. And I can't remember exactly. So she was in some Discord that Sam was also in for artists,
Okay.
She just showed a bunch of her work and talked about it. And Sam was just like, oh, this work is really good. And I like how she talks about things. She seems like she'd be good. And that was it. Right. So we've managed to avoid, at least for our recent hires, going through the whole process of putting out applications, reading through them, all that kind of stuff, just by seeing people who put themselves out there.
So do game jams and go on Discord and do those kind of things. Yep. Maybe more of the non-traditional, not just do your resume and send.
It's just people. I don't like going and talking to random people very much. I'm just not good at it. But it is one of those things like, and when I, growing up, I thought of networking as more of I feel like an MBA thing, like it feels kind of dirty.
Salesy, like, hey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not seeing people as people. That's what it feels like, right?
Yeah.
But that was a lesson we learned in our earlier days of going to conventions and stuff we would just go talk to other devs and just hang out, ask them what they were up to, try their games out.
Yeah.
Swap stories, had a lot of fun doing it. And we were mostly doing it because we're just trying to like have fun and hang out. And we wanted to know people in the industry to swap stories with, right?
Right.
And we realized a little bit into that, we're like, wait a second, this is what networking is, right? It's just hanging out and like learning stuff from people. And ever since, we've just kind of grown this big network that we have of people we can lean on, people throughout the industry that help us accomplish all kinds of things. And again, it was the putting yourself out there thing, which I find extremely, so you, as a person, supposed CEO of a supposedly successful small studio, right? Like, enormously challenging. Every time break out in a cold sweat, so it's hard for me too, but that's the key.
Yeah. It wears, some people get energized by it and other people get drained by it, right? Like, and then their power bars is like, and they just need to go back. I'm more the latter. Yeah. Some people are just like, it turbocharges them and it's like, it's not that. Yeah. And I mean, the industry's smaller in St. Louis, obviously, right? So you have to be more outright about things and doing stuff. I saw you're connected to the folks over at Trinket Studios.
They were one of the early sort of dev buddies we met.
Yeah, I worked with those guys at Wide Load Games.
Oh, awesome, yeah.
I've been in the crew there.
Yep.
God, that was like 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was probably before they were Trinket then, right?
Yeah, it was pre-Trinket. Yeah, we were all Disney employees at Wide Load.
Yeah.
And they were like starting their own studio and stuff. So
we met them. Yeah. We heard their stories from their Disney days when we first met them, which were interesting. I don't remember the details, and I probably wouldn't be allowed to talk about them. I imagine,
right.
But
don't piss the mouse off.
They're one of a handful of studios we met in our very early days. I think we met them at Indie PopCon, which is in Indianapolis.
Oh,
relatively small event. I think that was its first year, even maybe.
Wow.
It's kind of a pop culture event. There was like anime stuff and whatever.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
And they just kind of also had games. Beta, because we were showing Crashlands there, and they were showing Battleship Brigade. I'm pretty sure that they got first place and we got second, or they got second, we got third, something like that. And so we had like a little fun rivalry because they launched Battleship Brigade around the same time.
It's been out a long. Yeah, I've kind of lost touch with them. But
I also did, but now you've reminded me that I got to get back in touch.
What about starting a studio now? Like, what advice would you have someone like, hey, I'm inspired by you guys. I'm going to do that. Like, what's some advice you would have to start a studio?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is caring about your constraints and not fighting them. Right. There are a million things you could do. There's a million alternatives to any one thing you think you want to do.
Right.
And there are a million ways to do a given thing and just slightly tweak it, right? And I think the studios that I've seen struggle the most are the ones who they're there to make a game, right? They've got a specific game, they're going to make that thing. Rather than try to become, because it's really all about the team and what the team can do.
Yeah.
So the way that I think of it is that the games are a side effect of the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're good at doing the work and you're good at working together, then games come out. But that's it, right?
Yeah.
And so that has to be the focus, and figuring out how to ride that line between pushing the boundary into new spaces so that you can do stuff that's interesting and important and useful, and accepting that maybe you don't have the time right now, right? And we have to try to find out how to operate within constraints,
right?
Is an extremely challenging needle to thread all the time. And there's no right answer to it ever either, right?
Yeah.
But being extremely aware of that is the key. And for us, that was the fact that we started so from scratch, just knowing nothing except that we like.
Right, because you hadn't worked at other game studios, and now we're going to go do our own thing now. And because we learned all these lessons working at Studio X or Y, right? Yeah. Like you're just coming into it totally just fresh.
And Sam and Seth worked for like 9 months at a studio in St. Louis, just like very briefly, right before they started. But it was enough to like see kind of from the inside the development process and what it could look like.
How the sausage is made, as they say.
You know, there just wasn't enough for us to know what we were doing.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just kind of a peek, right? Little information.
Right.
That we knew we had to operate with our constraints.
No other option.
There was no pretending or faking otherwise. You know, we could see all the cool stuff that people were making, and we had no guess as to how in the hell did they do
that?
That, not even a guess. Today, I can guess all day, you know, but at that time, nothing. And so, you know, and Sam hadn't done art before. Seth had just started learning programming in Game Maker to make games, right?
Yeah.
And so they started making games, saying that's why we targeted mobile, because we're like, within our constraints, we think we can make stuff that could potentially work there. If we were trying to do that same stuff today, wouldn't go anywhere. Very different market today than it was in 2012.
Yeah. Very different.
But it was operate within this. And I think, to me, the quintessential example of that is Sam and Seth's first game jam, which is what set them on this path. Is the global game jam in 2012.
Yeah.
Just for fun.
It's like really in January, right? Yeah, it's like in the middle of winter.
Yeah, it's January. Really well. It's also where they met the guy who ran their studio that they worked at briefly. And that set them on that path, right? But the game that they made for that event was called Towel Fight of the Gods.
Okay.
And it opens, it's still up on our itch page, but it opens and, you know, God voice just says, "You've been teleported to the arena. Your arms have been replaced with bananas." And then it goes in. It's just this like bullet hell kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the reason we did that was because Sam didn't know how to draw. He couldn't draw arms. And so he was trying to draw arms and just kept looking like a banana. And we were like, fuck it, it's banana arms now. And we'll just tell the player, your arms have been replaced with bananas. They're not going to ask questions. It's a video game, you know?
Right.
And then just go. And I think that set the tone so well for how we've done. Just, and like if you play original Crashlands, you'll see the stuff where if you're like really, really paying attention, you'll notice that there's stuff we didn't do. And we just put explosions on top of things because we're like, well, we could animate this, or we could just put an explosion there, you know? So that we cover up the fact. Right. Yeah. And just so much of what we did was that. It's just this like tape and Band-Aids, you know, just slapped on top of things. So I think this, for me, most important thing, number one, is operating within constraints, being just scrappy, right? Trying to figure out how to do things really well. And the second one goes back to networking again, which is you got to put yourself out there, especially to people who can make things successful. And so for us, then and now, it's always meant the same thing, which is people who run stores. Because especially like if you're not an indie, you know, if you've got $100 million budget spent on ads, like you can do something with that. Like you can make awareness happen, right? If you're spending any less than like $10 million on advertising, it doesn't do anything. You just might as well not do. And I can't afford that, you know, we can't do it. But even if you can do that, there's still nothing more powerful than like the Steam pop-up on launch day if your game is in there, right?
Yeah.
Or historically on the App Store, you know, they did week-long features back in the day, which we had with Crashlands when we first launched. Today it's like a day, you know, so it's all changed. It's honestly gotten just harder across the board. The core idea is the same, which is try to find the people. And that's what basically everything that has made it so that we get to exist today was because we made stuff that people liked and we talked to the people that liked it. Right. And it was that combo of like stacking the dice and then the people that, and of course people move around the industry all the time. Or people we knew at one place that would then move to another place that we didn't have contacts in yet. We had struggled to get a contact into.
Right. But they were there now. So
I see on LinkedIn, hey, they moved from, you know, Nintendo Xbox or whatever.
Right.
They moved over to Xbox. Right. Can we talk about Crashlands 2 on Xbox? You know, whatever.
Yeah.
But again, because we met them all first as people just to get to know everybody. Right. And genuinely, like I genuinely want to know how the whole industry works. And so when I meet those people, mostly I want to know, what does your job look like? Right? How do you all decide, like, here's what goes into a feature system? Here's the games that we're going to pick. How do you decide all the stuff? Who decides all this stuff?
Right.
And so coming to that with the genuine curiosity that we actually had meant that we also got to have fun meeting people as people. And then kind of as a side effect, we now had all these business connections who could help us out to make stuff happen. And it was those two things, operating within our budget and never giving up talking. I can't even tell you how many times we emailed people at different platforms. I think Google is the big one because Google just loves being staffed by robots, so they've historically always been the hardest to find a person.
Yeah.
And especially back in the earlier days, it's like every week, clockwork, we'd send out a wave of emails to various people and to get any kind of response, trying to find the right person. You're trying to do all that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would be successful today. This is 10 years ago when we were really doing it. That's that big open question with all this stuff. Is like, I don't know what it looks like today to be at the very beginning. Right. But I imagine that at least those bits of it at core are the same.
Yeah, I was working on Avengers Initiative on mobile, and it was a big deal to get featured. And I remember we launched with Hulk, and then we did a Captain America update, and we got featured in the App Store going into the holidays, right? So it was like, what?
Yeah, that's a big one. Yep.
Yeah, we're like, and because you see the numbers is. Just when you get on that front page, that's massive, right? It's a huge bump.
It's one of those things of it's hard to appreciate just how big it is. But the other one is people wouldn't have known about us and we couldn't have made the proper business connections, right? That stuff matters so much in directions to the scale. So we launched Flop Rocket, which is one of our smaller first titles, before we launched original Crashlands. I think the year before we launched something like that. And just kind of, it was when we were starting to get to know people at the different app stores and stuff. And so we weren't really expecting anything, but we ended up getting it featured. And it wasn't it was a free to play game. We didn't know how to monetize stuff and we didn't want to do the gross things. And so it wasn't ready for us to have a big moment with it.
Yeah.
But it was still, we had 1.5 million downloads the first week.
Wow.
Just for an indie team, just putting a little game. It's a game we made in a few months, was just, it was basically a thing that to me, I was like, okay, maybe we can do this,
Right. Look, this thing happened, right?
You can get enough eyeballs. There was also that huge lesson that we learned so early on that without that, it would have been nothing, it would have been, we would have been lucky to get tens of thousands or something. And you can still see that with some of our games today. So I mentioned Tile Fight. Tile Fight of the Gods, our first jam game, right? Our first game that we launched into the stores was Tile Fight 2, Monocle of Destiny, which was basically the whole thing. Our whole thing is being silly and dumb, right? So it's a sequel to a jam game that nobody on the planet knows about, right? And
it's three people, maybe.
Just a few people. Right. But it's still in the stores. We keep it alive because there's some people who like it, and we like the idea of our stuff existing.
Right.
And to this day, hasn't made as much money as it cost us to make, right? And it's now, whatever it is, 12 years later, right? Yeah, and it didn't cost us anything to make it because we weren't paying ourselves, and there were three of us, right?
Yeah.
So, I think that, and we had that contrast very early on in our second game, Quadrupus Rampage. Just as a fluke, we don't even know how it happened because before we even knew anybody, got featured on Google Play. Same deal.
All right.
A couple million downloads in a couple of weeks or whatever. And we had these stark contrasts, right? And we also saw how hard it was to generate any revenue, even with 2 million downloads. So some really good early lessons that we got to kind of try to figure out what to deal with. That if we hadn't had those, there were just so many of these moments where if just the thing had gone the other way,
it would have been it. Much different thing. Yeah, because user acquisition stuff, especially in mobile, I've worked for some big companies, and it's just dump trucks of cash, right? I mean, they're just pouring tons of cash, and the free to play thing is all just, it's about user acquisition, right? And it's just, so you cannot compete with those people.
Lifetime revenue, right?
Yeah.
And they also, because that was, back in 2014 to 2016 is when we were.
Yeah, that was still free to play wasn't really a thing back then.
That was when it was like kind of like really starting to get up there.
Yeah.
But at that time it was still like we could imagine doing it. And we go to GDC and like there were so many talks about it and people were pretty optimistic in the industry. And then we were working on Levelhead. We sort of weren't sure if we we're going to go to mobile with it or what we we're going to do. GDC in like, I think it was 2017. I think it was 2018. And holy shit, the mood was, it was user acquisition costs were like $35 a user or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was after the App Store switched it. So the features were only a day. And so all these studios that were now like switching to business models where they were making like 12 games a year instead of 2, because they were like, we only get to make smaller games much faster because each one gets a day of treatment.
Right.
And they were like, we saw a lot of abuse of the subscription model where they were like, well, if we give somebody a subscribe, then they'll forget. And then we'll just get some revenue until they remember and, turn it off.
Oh.
And everyone was doing like all of this kind of stuff, which is, gross and horrible.
Yeah.
But also because the old ways of doing things were just gone.
Right.
Just didn't work. And so that was when we'd launched Crashlands as a paid game. So, but we were still entertaining the idea of free to play, but we went to that GDC and just saw the mood.
Right.
That time is over.
Hey, if you're finding this interesting, please click the like and subscribe button so the YouTube algorithms know and I can help spread the show. Thanks.
Again, if we were Zynga or somebody, right?
Right.
Or King or somebody, like, per user, right? And you can make that work. But if you're anybody else.
Yeah. And plus it's kind of hard to, without making it feel bolt on, because I've seen games where they go free to play right after being paid, and then it feels kind of weird. You're like, oh, this is just,
it can't be tacked on.
Integrated. Yeah.
And the way that we thought of it is that you're basically, what you're doing for free to play is you're making a store that is also a game, right? So you're not making stuff that you buy in a game, right? And so that's the way that we thought about it. We figured to be successful, that's what you had to do, was you had to say, I'm making two things at the same time, right? It's a store that looks like a game, basically. And it requires its own set of design philosophies. And just like with regular game design, like you could be gross and evil about, any kind of game independent of monetization strategy.
Right.
Because you're trying to you're basically like, you're presented with a problem, which is how would players play, want them to have fun, whatever your design goals are, then you can design towards that. And when you're making a game-shaped store, all your designs are going towards getting revenue.
Right.
And so it gets gross fast, and there's no, it's not surprising that that's the outcome.
Yeah. So I'm always curious about the topic of change, right? Like, that was huge, right? Like you're going from the laboratory to working full-time at Butterscotch Shenanigans. What was that like? Like what was going through your head in terms of doubts and concerns on how the hell am I going to do this, right? Like that had to be huge.
Yeah, I think it was a special circumstance since I was,
right. Yeah.
It was one of those like, whatever the outcome, I'll figure it out because I got to go do this kind of a deal.
Right.
But that doesn't take away the fact that it was a big, stressful change to make.
Yeah.
Because at the time, my plan was still like, help these guys get this company going and working and hang out with my brothers.
Right.
And once Sam was fine and the studio was running, then I would go back to my original plan, which again were loose, it was something in science, right? But go back into that as my career.
Right.
So that was my plan when I left and joined the team. But then it was, a year and a half later was when we got Crashlands out the door. Horrible madhouse trying to get it dealt with the aftermath of getting it launched.
Yeah.
And there was always more stuff to do, just always. But by that time though, stuff had switched a lot in like how I was thinking about it. Because again, originally it was like, this is temporary.
This is for family. This is temporary. I'll go back. Yeah. It's 2-year window.
And I was like, if I'm gone for 2 years, like it's going to be hard to come back into the sciences, right? Because I got to relearn a lot of stuff. I knew so many things, I had memorized like every single amino acid molecular structure and could draw it from memory and like all this stuff.
Yeah, right.
And I can't even tell you the names of them now.
Out of sight, out of mind, right? Because you're like,
exactly.
I'm not
it's
using
just, that is very familiar. Like I know I used to know that, but it's just gone.
Right.
So I knew there was a time limit, where at some point it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was kind of my big worry making the switch was like, what if it ends up turning out that I try to go back and can't because I really have to start over again? And again, I was, what was I, 28 or something? Or 26 even. Yeah. Just full of hubris, you know? So I was worried about it, but I was like, I don't know, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so just was worried the whole time, but not enough to really stop me from doing it or become like a problem.
Yeah.
And then as the time wore on, like it just turned out that the stuff I was trying to do was so interesting because science is all about trying to wrestle uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what you do and don't know, why you think you do and don't know those things, trying to identify all the possibilities, and then trying to very strategically say like, okay, let me go see if this is it or if right.
Hypothesis and try and do things.
And then design experiments to address them and all that.
Yeah.
And working in games is like honestly not that different, right? Like
problem solving,
unknowable, the problems, kind of bespoke of your own creation. So you have control of your problems at least to some extent, but only to an extent, you know?
Yeah.
Because once you sit down and try to do it, it's mostly chaos. And so this whole like the thing that I loved about doing science was that dipping into the unknown and just figuring stuff out and having hard problems to wrestle with.
Yeah.
There was more than enough of that.
That itch was getting scratched what you were doing, right?
Getting challenged any less by any stretch, right? And like the shape of some of the challenge was different. You know, I didn't have to go read
the context was different.
Paper, right? But really, it's just the same, you know?
Right.
You know, like I said earlier, like I spent so much of my time in grad school trying to figure out like, how do I successfully publish a paper? It just looks the same as making and selling a game, as assembling and publishing a scientific manuscript, right? If you know people, it's a hell of a lot easier.
Right.
If you whether or not you get the outcome you want with the product you're making, which, you know, now games, then, because a manuscript from science is just a product. Again, you know,
right.
It's packaged up really tightly and cutely. It's not a pure thing of thought like I grew up thinking it was, right? It's a tightly packaged thing for consumption by a particular audience through the medium of a particular journal, right?
Yeah.
And we would rewrite the papers each time we submitted to a new journal to try to like tailor it towards the stuff they were into. You know, like all of that kind of stuff, right? And not in a way that changed what we were reporting, but in a way that changed sort of the lens through which we were looking, right? So it'd be like, I go to this cancer journal. They need to like shift the focus because like it's biology, everything's about everything, you know? So you just kind of shift the focus of your conclusions, you know, like whatever. And I hated that aspect of science, honestly, because I was like, this is supposed to be about just what the truth is, and that's it.
Right. Here's the data. Right.
Yeah, here it is. And you know, that's naive, honestly, because like the things are interpreted. That's just how it works. But even though I didn't like that much, I started to kind of understand it. And when it came to games, I was like, it makes more sense in games that that's how it works. And again, it was the same. So kind of what's the difference ultimately?
Yeah.
And I mean, I got a lot of value out of the process of going through a PhD program, learning how to be extremely skeptical of stuff and identify what we can and can't know and design experiments around things.
Right.
I found
work ethic, right? Like, and that's a big thing.
Do so much. Yeah. There's a lot. I'm extremely glad I did it.
Yeah.
And it was very helpful just kind of indirectly. And there's a surprising number of biology PhDs floating out here in game dev space, or maybe we gravitate towards each other, possibly, you know, but like I've met a bunch, which is very funny, but.
Yeah. I work with Jen Chu, she's not PhD, but she has molecular biology background from U of I, right? And she's in game production.
Yeah. If I'd ended up in it for, you know, just history was shaped a little different, I probably would have gotten disillusioned and left anyway. That's kind of my guess at this point.
Right. If you had more time in it, right.
Yeah, but it's, you know, it's hard to say because like it's like with any industry, like finding your footing is really hard. But I don't think games is an extremely risky business to be in. Success is not very likely, but I don't think it's actually more risky than academic science.
Yeah. Okay.
There's so few spots available in the world even, right?
Oh.
competing for the same spots. A few grants, everyone's competing for the same grants.
Now everything's getting trashed thanks to the current bullshit that's going on.
Yeah, so, we're not going to have any science left. So
right. Like, get rid of that. It's on. It's just like, fuck.
Yeah. Right. So if I'd made it this far, then probably would have gotten kicked out anyway because we're going to permanently destroy science forever, I guess. So what we're up to now.
Yeah, which is terrifying.
It is.
What are you curious about how the industry's changing here in 2024, 2025 with, the platforms and releasing games and just stuff in general?
So much chaos because basically all of us making games are essentially the pawns used by a handful of giant companies to fight each other, right?
Right.
And that's kind of always been true. Definitely. It hasn't become any less true.
Right.
But exactly how they use us as pawns just is constantly shifting, right? We've successfully navigated that so far, but through sheer luck of timing, right? Like, when we were getting ready to launch Levelhead, was right when subscription services were taking off, just like the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So Levelhead was basically funded by Xbox Game Pass and Google Play Pass. If it wasn't,
because they needed content, right? Yeah,
they're like very early for both.
Yeah,
and just a year or so before that, there was another company trying to figure out how to do subscription services on mobile. Reached out to us about Crashlands. We made a deal. They temporarily had Crashlands in their portfolio. I was very careful with that contract, so we got it back when that program fell apart.
That's good.
Which is another important lesson: get the shit out of contract. And so
get a good lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Worth their money.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we got the game back, but after getting a chunk of cash also from that, and it was this like timing of like Crashlands at that time. Crashlands still being a more popular premium titles on mobile.
Mm-hmm.
So people looking for premium games for their subscription services were like, "Hey, I have this."
Right.
Also got an Apple Arcade once Apple Arcade started. Right.
Yeah.
So like we were there at the right time for all the subscription services.
Mm-hmm.
When we originally launched Crashlands, was right when Steam opened its doors. Like Crashlands went through green light, right?
Oh, well.
It was right at that time. And it was at the time that on mobile, it was like just at the end of when you could sell a premium game on mobile, right? We were on the other side of the peak already. We weren't all the way at the floor.
Yeah.
So we got so lucky there. So lucky with subscription services. With Crashlands 2, the subscription services were kind of already starting to mellow out.
Yeah.
But then there was a new one coming along, which was Netflix. They were looking for games, right?
Oh,
so
right. Yeah.
We were temporarily partners with Netflix, which gave us enough funding to basically make Crashlands 2 the game we wanted it to be. Because we were starting to run out of fumes.
Yeah.
And it was that combination of like really good timing.
Yeah.
And again, putting ourselves out there, just knowing lots of people.
Mm-hmm.
Subscription services are really winding down, right?
Yeah, I've heard that. It's not the golden age.
And it's not for the kinds of games, because everyone is now focused on their, what do they call it? What's the monthly day 30 retention? That's the one.
Oh, yeah.
Day 30 retention, right? Which used to be just a free-to-play thing, but the subscription services are now also, like, that's now becoming their focus. So portfolios are shifting. The upfront money that was there at the beginning, just gone. It's just not available. And I don't know what's next, right? Like, subscription services were kind of a surprise. Like, I didn't know that was next. If it wasn't for that, we would have really had trouble. Those are gone now. We're hoping that Crashlands 2 can stand on its own. We're hoping that there's still some gas left on mobile for premium titles.
Right.
Steam is always like, I always put my money on Steam as a platform.
Yeah.
It's just the stable one.
People have tried to take Steam out and
can't do it.
Look at Amazon. Like they spent hundreds of millions of dollars and they were trying to take out Steam. And it's just got a brand there. It's a thing.
They know they're selling video games, right?
Right.
The other platforms, like, I'm not 100% sure the people in charge know that they're trying to sell video games. The people who we work with absolutely love video games. That's what they're all about. But like the people really in charge, like, I don't think they know that's what they're doing.
Right.
And Steam does. It's a platform for video games, good store for users, they got to figure it out. So it's like, for me, it's like, we'll always bet on Steam.
And that's fair.
that might be all that's left, though. We're going to see with Crashlands 2's launch. We've already backed out of consoles because it's just impossible to get visibility on consoles, right? Because everyone's pulled, all of the indie programs have been pulled away. So there's just no visibility. If you don't have visibility, there's no point in putting in all the effort to build the store.
Right. Yeah.
Switch 2, people think maybe might save us, but if they don't make that store good,
it's not
going to. We're going to make the store good because they can sell their first party titles without it.
Well, that's always been Nintendo, right? It's first party. They take care of first party, and then this other stuff can be more of an afterthought, unfortunately.
Blue skies, right? Because it was a new platform with no backwards compatibility. Switch 2, it's backwards compatible, so there's no it's not a blue sky console either.
Yeah.
And everybody, rightly for players, is going backwards compatible now. I don't think a console could get away with it anymore.
Yeah.
Not doing it. But that also means that we don't get to count on like the turnover of, hey, there's no games in here right now, right?
Yeah.
And I think historically, all the other platforms, consoles in particular, because they had that kind of like clean slate thing.
Right.
I think that's why they just never bothered to like make their stores good, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like Steam did. It's because Steam's like you accumulate their library. I joined Steam when it came out.
Right. It's like a trophy case of all of your games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been accumulating games in there for 21 years.
Look at that library of games, orange box.
Yeah. Just the whole time, right? Like,
right.
So I don't know. So that's for me. I'm just like, I don't know. Horizon that makes me be like, oh yes, this is the thing we'll reach for after Crashlands 2, right?
Yeah.
Start pushing towards this new business model or towards this company to be a partner or anything. There's just like nothing right now on the radar. And to me, that's the thing I'm most curious about and also most worried about is just like, what if there's nothing,
Yeah, right.
But Steam keeps going strong.
Too, it's pricey, so it's still kind of a niche, but yeah.
Taking off, it feels like. I got one right here just hanging out because I've been testing Crashlands 2 on it. But
oh, cool. I have not plunged yet. I figured it would be good because
it is one of those, like, I think the next gen one is going to be like the right one to get. Like this one's solid, great. Really wish it had a higher screen resolution. Thing. I think maybe the next gen if they ever put one out.
So here's a loaded question. Like, what are your thoughts on AI? Like, how do you think about this new thing?
Yeah.
Newish thing, I should say.
I think this was interesting. So my take on this actually fundamentally is that it's not new to video games.
Right.
In the sense that like AI in the more broad sense, it's like, we've been making AI for NPCs the whole time.
Right.
But everybody knows A-star, like to your pathfinding algorithms, all this kind of stuff, right? We've been dealing with, because games are simulations of reality we've had to do, and they need to be surprising.
Yeah.
So we can't.
NBA Jam would cheat to have one team better than the other because the designers like Detroit or whatever, right? There's always been stuff going on like that.
Yeah. So exactly. So to me, like AI is like a category, right? Something very familiar in games. Similarly, procedural generation, very at home in games, right?
Right.
Proc gen is extremely challenging to do stuff with successfully, right? And it's because of the nature of randomness, right? Which is randomness is boring as hell, but by default, right? Because it's sort of definitionally not surprising. And you can like prefer outlier events or have distributions that give you weirder stuff, right? Sure.
Yeah.
But the stuff also has to like work and make sense. And so the exercise of making a really good procedurally generated game or subset of game content is basically about how do you successfully harness randomness to make it look like it was designed.
Oh, right.
And so for that, it's basically like, because we did this with Crashlands 1. So like the world is procedurally generated. And we did this with actually all of our games before that, because there's some degree of procedural generation, which is a fancy way of saying we did some random stuff.
Right.
But that's how we got a lot with a little. You build the pieces, and then you spend a really long time tweaking the algorithm that's going to give you those random results that then are actually a good experience.
Yeah.
And that's now where the challenge moves to, right? So the challenge doesn't, you change the nature of the problem from make fuckloads of content to make a really good algorithm, right? So if we take the same thing over into like the LLM space, because usually people are talking about for AI, right?
Yeah.
If you take that into there, it's the same problem, right? Which is the way that people are thinking about can we use LLMs in games is, hey, this is a way to make fuckloads of content with
Right.
minimal input. But it's the same shape of a problem, meaning, yeah, but there's all kinds of fuckloads of content a person can make using some kind of generative thing, right?
Right.
LLMs are extremely unconstrained, extremely constrained, because it's text-based, right? So it's just extremely computationally costly. And games are no like an A-star algorithm to do pathfinding. Like if you mess that thing up and have to check an extra 100 spaces, it's nothing, right?
Yeah.
And you've got 100 enemies on screen, you're toast. You just nuked the game, right? Let's go.
Yeah.
So everything we do in video games, because we're creating whole simulations, right, is how do we optimize the ever-living shit out of this?
Right.
Constrain it really tightly and figure out how to have the thing generate seeming content. LLMs are not for that. They're not constrainable in that way, right? And they're not efficient enough to be used in the same way that we think of proc gen stuff in video games. Right. I think there is some potential there, maybe, for sufficiently creative use cases in the same way that there is for anything random in video games.
Yeah.
Right? None of it works out of the box, right? There's an enormous amount of stuff that goes into it. I think it bugs me when people think about a procedural or Gen AI as a panacea of some sort for video games, because the way that people talk about it is hey, you can just throw AI at it and now your problems are solved. No, that's not how this works in video games, right?
Yeah.
There may be some domains where that's true. I'm not convinced there are, but there might be.
Yeah.
But video games is not one of those because your constraints are so intense. But the other part of it too is video games are also about creating shared experiences, right? And this is another place where procedural generated games suffer, is you can't really tell somebody about the cool thing that you did unless the procedural part was just the point, right? So there are games that pull that off pretty effectively. They're rare because, again, enormous design challenge to pull that off. Right? So much of games is about having a shared experience that you can talk about, and you can't get that out of procedural content. So I think there's a lot of things that make it so that LLMs in particular are not well, just in terms of how they work. It just doesn't pair with video games. In my opinion, at least for the content of video games. And I think the same is true for generative images, because generative images suffer from a similar kind of problem, which is that the reason that they work and seem so interesting and cool is because you can describe a general thing and get a specific thing out, right?
Yeah, right. You type it in, look at that. Oh, but they have 6 fingers or whatever.
Yeah, the problem is you can't specify a specific thing and get a specific thing. And that's what you need in well-designed anything, right? But video games, the amount of, if you look at the art pipeline that we have going into the stuff in Crashlands 2, for example, every single creature is so carefully designed so it animates in a way that's useful and again is efficient because it's got to run in the game context, right? It's
different platforms and
and all this kind of stuff, and it's got to get hooked into our sound system, and there's all these different pieces, right, that to get in place. So everything has to be animated, but not like a video, because it has to be dynamic and interact with stuff, and so it has to be done through Spine or equivalent kinds of animation software, and that has to be married fully to overall design aesthetic of the game and has to fit within the context. It's a crafting game. Crashlands 2 is a crafting game, so we've got resources you go harvest that have to look like they fit in the world. And when you harvest them, stuff comes out that feels like it makes sense in there. But also everything is a joke, but a joke of a particular flavor. Right? You just go on and on and on about all this kind of stuff. And any one of those things in isolation could be the incidental output of a sufficiently interesting prompt in some kind of generative AI system, right? But not in a way where you can make it all work coherently. Who knows what the future is for these things, but in my opinion, just fundamentally because of how they work. They just don't mesh with games. I think for us, the use case that does make sense is basically just assistance with programming for expert programmers.
That kind of stuff on the code.
We'll adapt it for that use case where you're running it on a rig. You've got constant access to the internet. The person who's doing stuff is editing as they go, all that kind of stuff, potentially. But when it comes to game content, I maybe I'm not sufficiently imaginative, but I can't imagine how a person would harness it. And I haven't seen anybody do it yet there,
Yeah.
But maybe someone's gonna figure that out.
So what's been your favorite game to work on, right? Like you've worked on a bunch. Like, is there one that is just like, that was the one, is it Crashlands, just since that was the first?
I think it's kind of there's a two vibes answer, right?
Okay.
It's really hard to beat. As horrible as the making of Crashlands, original Crashlands was, with Sam being sick and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It being just like us working together, just us.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't, and therefore didn't, worry about anything at all. It was just making the game.
Right.
We weren't trying to make payroll because we weren't paying ourselves. So lots of other worries as a consequence, right? But when it came to doing the work, it was just like,
yeah, all in, right?
Just no tech debt, nothing. We're just trying to make this thing.
Right.
And it was brutal and really hard. We worked so much. Every day it was just like 7 to 7, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Just working all the time. And it wasn't that it was a good time, but it's just one of those, like when you're looking back, there's always the wistful, like, oh, if I'm just doing one thing and it was just us, So I think there's that. And that was also that was when I was learning everything. That was when I built our first login system, because we have cross-platform save syncing.
Oh, okay.
And we've been doing that since then.
Oh, wow.
That was the thing I identified when I joined the team. I was like, if we had this, I feel like that's going to help us a lot. To give people a reason to give us their email address in exchange, they get to take their data across platforms, and you can't do that otherwise.
Yeah.
So I built that. I had no fucking what I was doing.
Right.
I learned PHP, learned MySQL, and just built this thing,
Yeah.
And I've still got the code sitting in a repo. It's long since replaced. Although it is still running today.
Yeah. Okay.
So
that says something.
Which is wild. I don't touch it. Still going. But just like making a thing, fully not knowing what I was doing, having it work in the end.
Yeah,
we launched Crashlands with it. And so, so we had a few 100,000 people in the system at that time.
Yeah.
And just very cool, to like do all that without knowing it. So there was that. And then I think the contrast is Levelhead, which is, that was when I felt like we got our shit together. So
right.
We did so much cool stuff. Like I drafted our initial build pipeline so that we could start automating builds, automated our patch note system. So it goes from our code history.
Yeah.
All the messages in there go right into our public patch notes, right? Systems like that.
That's nice.
Bring our QA department to our DevOps stuff. And then having that release go so smoothly, like I described earlier.
Yeah.
I think that, and also that game took us 2 years, tightly scoped. It was very hard to make, but it was just tightly scoped. It's a platformer. You share levels, right? So and such interesting problems, but each one like just solvable, and then it was done.
Yeah.
And I felt like we solved each one so well. And so I think that one was like the most fun, like project and transitionary kind of period, which is then funny because it contrasts with like the game just did okay when we launched it.
Right.
After all that, and it went so I still love that game. And I do just honestly believe it is just one of the top games out there. Yeah. And the people who play it love it. We've got people in our community who've been playing it since it came out, Not that many of them though.
Right. But yeah.
But yeah, so it was one of those like just so rewarding of a project to work on from a having made a thing kind of standpoint. And Crashlands 2, I would love to say it's Crashlands 2 because this game is truly a labor of love. I'm so tired.
Right.
It's so
like
long.
April 10, that's it. Yeah. What's a funny or odd story being in this industry for 13 years, right? Is there something related to a trade show or a submission or just, anything like that you'd like to share?
I think one of the weirdest experiences that we had was after we launched Crashland, we were going to some award shows and stuff. And I don't remember what the event was, but it was like alongside GDC. I think it was a mobile games award show of some sort.
Okay.
I don't even think it was like broadcast because it was also in the earlier days, so the earlier days of 2016, right? But where like streaming wasn't as big of a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think it was just like there. So we got entered and got like second or third place or something. But they sort of had like a guest of honor thing. It was the first time I was introduced to the concept of like a wealthy tech company hiring a random actor, right?
Yeah.
And it was, what's his name? The guy who plays Lando Calrissian.
Ooh.
Can't remember that actor's name. But from the originals.
Okay.
But he was just there. It was just fucking weird, right? He was just there as like, so like he was
the
brought
MC
up by,
or something, or
not even just like a guy to like come like introduce the event, sort of, right?
Okay.
But like didn't seem to know why he was there. Like, he just like kind of was there, right?
Right.
Just long enough to. Oh no, he basically he handed out the awards at the end, so we got to go. I got to shake his hand, right?
Okay.
But it was just the whole thing was just so out of nowhere,
right?
Bizarre,
Surreal, right? Yeah.
And it reminded me, it reminds me of like Silicon Valley kind of stuff, right? Why? Like, why is this? Why is this happening? But it was the context of like the event was put on by, at that time in particular, there was so much money going on in mobile. And so it was put on by either a particular company or a conglomeration of companies. And so they were just like throwing money at this thing. And it was like one of the ways they showed they had it was just by the appearance by a guy who doesn't seem to know why he's here, Right. Very weird.
And then someone's just watching, just has this idea in marketing one day, and they're like, yeah, why not? Call his agent. Okay, we'll do it for $100K. Sure, whatever.
Yeah. And he's just there, I guess.
Yeah.
Very weird. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think the other weird, just like the general weird stuff in the industry has been all the stuff I grew up thinking was so like distant and, and weird, right? We got invited to Nintendo when we brought Crashlands to Switch. Then we were also there direct at the time. And I don't know if they're still doing it today, but at that time anyway, it was kind of in the earlier days of their various indies programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so they invited that group for that Indie Direct event to the Nintendo America headquarters.
Okay. So you're out
to
there.
basically have like a local thing and have journalists come and stuff. And that was one of those like simultaneously extremely surreal experiences of like growing up with a Nintendo and like, all this kind of...
Right.
And we had a tour with like the CEO of Nintendo America at the time. I can't remember what his name was, but came in to say hi to everybody just briefly. We got by somebody who was like responsible for some really original Nintendo shit. Like this really weird moment as a person who like likes games, but I'm not like a big gamer, but I've just always liked games. And that was one of those things. I think that for me, the weird part of that was how big of a deal it felt like it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
But because of when it happened, which was like, we'd already fought so hard for visibility on an Apple.
Yeah.
And we had all this success over there with like getting feature treatments, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And by the time we finally got there, it was like, it kind of fell flat. Right.
Oh, interesting.
And it was this weird moment where I was like, this is kind of a bummer. Like thinking about this, like the stuff that's magical kind of like going away. And if it had just happened a year earlier, it would have been like one of the most impactful experiences that I had.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of thing to me is like, that's the weirdest part of my industry experience. And the sort of increasing erosion of the magic, right?
Right, yeah.
Which isn't, I think it's not a net negative because I kind of like having the magic taken away at least a little bit. But every once in a while I'm like, oh God, I wish I got to experience this when I didn't know anything that and different.
Yeah. So you probably don't have any time for this. I mean, you don't have anything you can even mention, but like, are there any games you're playing right now that you're excited about? Like in those little off hours you have between shipping Crashlands 2?
It's a boring answer, but it is Crashlands 2 because it's the only game I'm playing right now because I got to play test it at every opportunity. But also, obviously I'm excited about it, because we've got to get it done and get it out. And working on a game for so long without people getting to play it really adds to the it's just crippling over time. You want to tell people stuff. And the original Crashlands has such a positive fan base.
Mm-hmm.
And they've all been wanting Crashlands 2 for so long. And we just have been able to tell them so little, and it's taken them so long to get this game out to them that I don't get excited about that much stuff, as we kind of just addressed. But I don't get excited that much about this stuff anymore. But this one is like, I'm very excited to get this thing out. So it's mostly that, but I did also play a bunch of Balatro for a while because...
Oh, yeah, that's...
how could you not?
Everywhere, right? I read about it all the time. I've downloaded it, and I started to get into it, and then got distracted. But yeah, it's everywhere.
It's for the best, because if you get a little into it, that's what you're doing now for a while.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very well designed. It's such a smart game. Yeah.
What about finding you online, right? Because you've got the podcasts, you've got Discord, you've got the games. Like, go to the website. Or like, how do you want?
If you're trying to find me as a person, if you just go to adamcoster.com, that's Coster with a C, C-O-S-T-E-R. That's like, that landing page has all of my links to everything.
Right. So you're
Yeah. So if you want to find me anywhere, that's where you would go. Yeah. I'm not particularly responsive on anything, but I do eventually check. So
yeah.
If you hit me on LinkedIn, hit me on Blue Sky is the social media I'm using these days.
Yeah, I'm on Blue Sky too.
If you hit me up there, then I'll eventually.
Right. People have to understand, again, when you're shipping a game, it's,
there's a lot going on. Yeah. We're just, we're a little busy. So that's the main one. Then for the studio, if you, it's bscotch.net.
Okay.
The letter B and scotch, like the booze, bscotch.net.
Right.
That's where all of our links to our podcast and our Discord, Crashlands too.
Yeah. I mean, you guys, is the podcast weekly or bi-weekly?
It's weekly. Yeah. This year. So just sheer, weirdness of timing. January 1st or 2nd was our 500th episode.
Wow.
For our podcast. And coming up here, basically like right around the launch of the game, is our 10-year anniversary of doing the podcast.
Damn. I knew you guys had been doing it a while. I didn't realize it was 10 years. Wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time. The first 13 episodes, the audio quality is just fucking garbage, So those are no longer in the RSS feed. It is funny and also kind of horrifying to go back and listen to those.
I listened to the last one, and production quality was very good, and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, we figured out.
Right. You talk about getting old. I'm like, I can relate to that.
Yeah, exactly.
Guy that got in the industry in 89. I've got some scars. I got some some stuff.
Yeah, you've seen more than we have, definitely.
Yeah.
But it's so we've been doing that for a long time. It's give it a listen, kind of thing that you're into. Yeah, that's the main stuff we're up to. Of course, is check out Crashlands too, but of course it's not available yet. So
yeah, but the podcast, you talk about making design decisions and tech and stuff like that. So it's kind of a cool little snapshot of like a work in progress of seeing what goes on behind the curtain when people are making a game and trying to figure shit out. So
yeah, and we try to we're as honest as we can be given NDAs and and we do err towards being a little more honest than we're supposed to be. So we do have a lot of behind the scenes stuff, definitely. And you can hear our changing opinions about stuff over the years. Yeah. Probably there's some real embarrassing ones back there somewhere, but hopefully not too embarrassing.
I think it's good for people who are, mystified about the industry and stuff, like, listen to how these brothers are making the game, and learn about the process.
And make it the best we go, because
right.
We don't know what we're doing. But again, that is the secret, is nobody else does either, People have ways of doing things, but that's not the same thing as knowing what we're
right. And just the last question, like, what's one piece of advice you'd give others right now in the game industry here in 2025? Like, I know it's weird, it's strange, it's scary, like any kind of advice.
It's always been about probabilities, so that hasn't changed.
Right.
And that's true of the broader entertainment industry, right? I mean, also every industry, but in particular entertainment, because nobody needs the stuff we make,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, nobody needs it. It's
right. It's entertainment. They're not going to
entertainment. Yeah.
Starve if they don't have it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're in a really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good for people.
Yeah. People need, right.
But they don't need any specific one, right? Because they all solve basically the same problem, which is, I want something interesting to do, right?
Yeah.
So that's always been true. Right now, the probabilities are really biased against everybody, right?
Yeah.
But the shape of it is still the same, right? And so the game that we have to play is the same one we always have, just kind of more focused, which is try to figure out how to stack the dice and keep rolling them, right?
And
it's more important now than ever to stack those dice. And to figure out how. But if you really focus on your own fluency and your own skill and that of your team,
right,
those investments, they just pay off no matter what else is going on. Even in all the worst case scenarios, you get to take that with you, right?
Yeah, you've learned those things.
Happens next.
Yeah.
So that's probably
fair. Yeah.
Parting piece.
Cool. Well, good luck on the launch, April 10th. It'll be out. So this podcast will be out before then, and people can put it on their Steam wish list and, get ready to download it and stuff. And continued success with everything and the podcast too.
Podcast episodes.
Yeah. No, I'm glad your person David reached out and made this connection. So cool.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, thank you, Adam. I'll let you get back to it. Have a great night.